Hi, and welcome to the Dr. Coffee Podcast, your weekly blend of motivation, encouragement, education, and insight into all things medicine for junior doctors and medical students in South Africa. If you're listening to this episode on or after the 24th of May 2023, this is the re-recorded and rebooted version of episode 2 of the podcast, all about applying for internship as a medical doctor. I decided to come back and redo this episode for a number of reasons. First of all, when I recorded the original, I was only a first-year intern and I had a fair deal less insight into the internship experience as well as the types of options people would consider for internship. Secondly, I've since come across additional resources which give you loads of information about the various internship hospitals and make the decision of where to apply a lot easier. Thirdly, I recorded episode 2 in a darkened room late at night in July 2022, and I felt that listening back to it, the episode just dragged a little bit and could do with a bit more punch. So here we are. Obviously, this episode is primarily prepared for current medical students, especially those towards the end of their undergraduate degree. If you're a final year, it's usually around the middle of the year that the topic of internship starts to stick at the forefront of your mind. So if you're a final year student, then I'm sure you'll find this episode helpful. But really for any medical students, whether you're in first year or third year or going into your clinical rotations, I think providing accurate information about internship is really important. It's helpful to discuss these matters now while the pressure is off so you can get a sense of where you're going and have a chance to plan ahead. So in this episode, we'll discuss the process of applying using the Department of Health's online ICSP website and how to go about selecting a site or a hospital complex and maybe give you a bit of an algorithm to follow so that you can make a decision for yourself. Ultimately, it's your future and it's your training, and there will be many different preferences and variables to take into account. Some of these are obvious, such as the choice to stay in the circuit in the province that you trained in, or to leave to work in another province, or to choose to work in an urban center or a rural center. And some choices are a little bit more nuanced, such as wanting to work at a particular hospital because it's known for certain rotations being particularly strong, or for personal factors such as if you're married or in a serious relationship, whether you have a medical condition, or whether you're a foreign-born or South African-born applicant. In reality, then, the choice of internship is almost as individual as the number of interns going into placements. Starting out on this episode, I obviously want to caution against anyone thinking I'm giving the impression that I know everything about internship and the application process. There's a good chance I may be incorrect about something in this episode. I frequently am wrong, so please do listen carefully and check what you hear against your experience and let me know if there's anything we can improve on. On that note, I'd like to thank you for the questions I received via Instagram and email while putting this episode together. It helped me to know what questions people have and where the issues really are. Most of them have been successfully incorporated into this revised episode. If you have a question and you feel that the episode doesn't address it, you're welcome to reach out to us. I also want to direct you to other people who've put together some absolutely brilliant resources for you, some of which we'll reference in the show notes of this podcast. There are lots of people on Instagram and other platforms who've shared their experience of internship, and certainly their wisdom is valuable in this regard. I would also just counsel that no one person should be the end-all and be-all of your internship choice. At the end of the day, you need to make a decision that's right for you, knowing that you might not get it. For some people, despite having the best laid plans, despite every single reason for a certain internship posting, that might not be how it unfolds for you. And for reasons we discuss in this episode, you'll see why that isn't necessarily the end of the world. So to begin with, let's start by explaining what internship is. Internship is really the beginning of your junior doctor years in South Africa. You've completed medical school, so you are a doctor. Let's make that clear. An intern is a doctor registered with the HPCSA, but you're practicing under supervision to hone and improve your craft and see what it's really like to work as a doctor. In the current system, internship is 2 years of a roughly structured and standardized training program, and then you go on to do your community service year. You may hear people talk about your Zoomer year. That is the comm service year, not internship. ComServe was introduced as part of the Health Professions Amendments Act number 56 of 1998. So there has been community service for doctors in South Africa for more than 20 years. Internship in South Africa parallels similar programs in other countries. In the UK, for example, it's called your Houseman Year. In many other countries, like South Africa, it's called internship. In some countries, you can choose to do internship within a certain domain that you're interested in. However, in South Africa, internship is spread out over 2 years or 24 months, and you have to complete all of the various rotations, whether you're interested in them as a career down the line or not. So the first year of internship is made up out of 4 major rotations of 3 months each, and different groups will start with different rotations and then rotate through all 4. It rotates through pediatrics, obstetrics and gynecology, surgery, and internal medicine or general medicine. Each of those is in a different department within your hospital complex, and sometimes it may actually even be in a whole different hospital. I think of my colleagues at Helen Joseph Hospital, and they do their obstetrics and gynecology as well as their pediatrics blocks at Rahima Musa Mother and Child Hospital, because those departments of Helen Joseph are actually in a hospital just down the road at Rahima Musa. So although they are Helen Joseph interns for the purpose of their training, they complete those blocks at a different hospital. The second year of internship is made up of slightly more specialized rotations, as well as family medicine and emergency medicine, which really sum up everything you learned in first year internship. So in second year, you get to rotate through anesthetics, orthopedics, psychiatry, and that family medicine block. Overall, first year is a lot more supervised and structured, and a little bit more intense in terms of work hours. A second year intern, though, is a little bit more chilled, have a little bit more specialized focused care, and you'll be expected to carry a little bit more responsibility, which is quite exciting. By the end of internship, the goal is that you're ready for community service and that you really are expected to be a proficient doctor. After all, you're going to be responsible for patients. You now have an MP number instead of an IN number, and that's a whole level of responsibility above internship beyond the scope of this particular episode. Moving forward now, let's talk about the application process. It begins online on the ICSP website, and that stands for Internship and Community Service Placement. The very first step of the process is a preparation phase, which is really just to verify your details. It usually happens in July or so, but that obviously depends on the Department of Health. Now bear in mind that they usually have a mid-year cycle of applicants who weren't placed at the start of the year or were asynchronous for one reason or another, and they will only start the annual cycle process once that mid-cycle one in the middle of the year is wrapped up. So it can be quite variable. Your medical school will register you with the HPCSA and with the government, the Departments of Health. This should have already taken place by the time you start your final year, and you will know this because you have an INS or student intern number. All of those details should already be loaded for you. The provinces also liaise with national government, and then the posts that are available become calculated. After this, then the next phase can begin, which is the actual application phase. And in the beginning, you're not even choosing your sites yet. What you first need to do is just log on and then check that the information your medical school has provided is correct. So you check your ID number, you check your contact information, you check that your name and surname is spelled correctly, things like that. I think there's also at this stage you sign a declaration that you don't have a criminal record, but basically it's like all the administrative tasks. Once you've done that, you'll also indicate that you want to register as a South African citizen or as a permanent resident or as a foreign-born doctor training in South Africa. This is important for placements because usually the South African-born and South African-trained doctors are offered placements ahead of foreign-trained and foreign-born doctors. So in the first round of the application process, after they've verified your details, usually up to a month or so later, there'll still be an opportunity for you to upload documents or to confirm and update details in case anything might change in that time. And then finally, it's usually around about September or October when you'll actually be able to apply for posts. You'll also be able to make applications for special considerations of why you should get your first choice sites. Now, this is probably the most nerve-wracking process of the whole journey. The first advice I want to offer you is don't get caught up in the haste. even though the website will have an opening date and a closing date, you're able to use all of that time in between with which to complete the form. It doesn't matter if you're the first person or the last person to complete your details in your registration, you'll still be considered as long as your application is done within the window. But of course, everyone wants to get it done, and of course, everyone rushes. So in the beginning, the ICSP website crashes often, and that's because you've got 3,000 potential interns all trying to use the platform at the same time. And the infrastructure is just not able to carry that load. I think especially with the context of load shedding, it crashes repeatedly. And obviously it's very frustrating to everyone. So speaking from experience, go slow, don't rush, don't feel the pressure in the beginning. Also, hardware does seem to be a factor. It does seem that Google Chrome is the best browser to use in order to navigate the website pages. I wouldn't use Safari browser or Samsung Internet on your phone. Rather, just use Google Chrome. It seems to help to also rather use a desktop or a laptop computer rather than a smartphone. And I think this is because of the extra formatting required for the layout of the smaller smart screen phones and different proportions. But again, sometimes it's very laggy and you just have to hit refresh. But don't keep hitting refresh, rather just wait for it to load. Even though your sanity is saying, but I just want to hit refresh, just be patient and wait. Another tip is that sometimes people would choose to try log on late at night when the traffic is less. But really, ultimately, you've just got to know that as long as you have your form completed by the end of the allotted period, you'll be fine. Relating back again to my own experience, I was very frustrated in the beginning when the site would crash and I couldn't log on, and I felt like I was just wasting time and the emotional resources as well. But if you wait a week or two, the site starts to respond a lot better. And that was when I could get things done, even if I was just like a little bit by bit and come back and complete the form later. And then maybe within 10 or 14 days of the window being open, it's just free flowing. Everything works well and everything goes smoothly. So if you're the kind of person who can't tolerate that lagginess in the beginning, just give it a week or two and it'll make a world of difference. Just be patient with yourself and with the technology. Everyone is trying to get done as soon as possible. And of course, everyone's very excited. Just be patient when it comes to applying for posts. Once you are up and running, you'll be asked to select sites for internship. So later on in this episode, we'll talk about how many provinces you can apply for, how many metros and that sort of thing. But before we do that, let's talk about some of the variables that will affect what your choices will be and how the government weighs it up. So under special considerations, as I mentioned, you are able to apply for posts with some considerations in mind. The first one is what's called a social compact. This basically boils down to expressing that you have some connection to a significant person in your life who you don't want to be posted away from. There are different classifications of social compacts, which you can see on the website, but for clarity, I'm going to briefly describe here. The first one is a social compact between two doctors who want to be posted together, such as the case of two doctors who marry to one another and then who want to go to the same hospital. The second category would be a medical doctor who is married to another staff member, but somebody who's not actually a doctor, be it an allied health professional or a non-clinical worker, and they want to travel together and work at the same hospital. The third category can be exemplified by a medical doctor who is married to someone who has a contracted job that would limit their ability to leave their current address. And finally, the fourth category would be a medical doctor who has important social or business obligations anchoring them to one area, such as if you have a business that you want to be able to continue to run while working as an intern. The website actually explains very clearly what you can and cannot do. The websites will actually alert you and say, oh, you failed to fill this in, or you need to upload this, or this option is not available because of XYZ. And so there are constant reminders, which is really helpful. And if something's unclear, it's often clarified by a little error message or some kind of information bar on the website itself. So let's talk about some of the special situations you might find yourself in. Beyond just a social compact, we need to take into account that some of our intern colleagues will be married or planning to be so soon. Some of our intern colleagues may have children, and some may have family responsibility like looking after elderly or frail parents. So it is within your rights and it is within your ability to specify and say, look, I'm married, I can't go to another part of the country, or look, I have a child in school. Bringing this close to home, in my case, I applied with not one, but 3 children in school, which I think we can agree is a lot of responsibility and probably a bit too much to just dump on my wife while I go do internship somewhere else for 2 years. So that was something that I had to bring up with him, and also say, I can't just uproot my family and move, I didn't want to be posted in a place outside of town where I'm going to have to commute long distances, or where I'm not going to see my family for periods of time. So on my application, I was able to specify I have 3 children in school. I was able to provide supporting documentation, which in this instance took the form of letters from their schools and their birth certificates. And just to bring a perspective, the number of interns with children is a very small percentage. I think in total, out of 2,500 interns or so that got placed in my year, there was only about 37 of us that actually had children or some kind of important reason why they couldn't be placed somewhere else. So if this applies to you, rest assured that you are given special preference and they do take it into account. And it's really an exceptional circumstance rather than the norm. There's not many people that have very, very clear exceptions to where they could be posted. Another consideration would be if you have health challenges or concerns or some other special needs, and maybe you require special treatment for a medical condition, or you can't be exposed to certain substances or situations, and that can also be mentioned in the application, and then you get a post that's suitable for you. So let's actually take a look, and I'm going to read from the actual guidelines from the National Department of Health. In the guidelines, under subpoint 24, with submitting motivations for special and personal considerations, and I'm reading now and I do quote, it says, special or personal consideration motivations will be considered during the application process. However, it should be noted that submitting such a motivation does not guarantee it will be accepted or applied in the allocation processes. Applicants are encouraged to carefully review the requirements in the following sections and actively consider posts that will promote workable solutions. So the first point is medical, disability, or legal considerations affecting the applicant. A medical, disability, or legal consideration which affects the applicant is classified as a special consideration. Note that in either of these 3 cases, the motivation must affect the applicant to the point that it requires special consideration in their placement or is required under Section 15 of this guideline. A weak motivation, for example, would include a chronic illness that does not affect the person's ability to be reasonably placed at any facility. Note, a medical intern applicant may be referred to the Health Professions Council of South Africa for an impairment review. The following supporting documents should be submitted on the ICSP online as part of the motivation. And there they give a table where, for example, if you have a medical condition, they need a medical declaration form, or if there's a legal reason, they need a copy of a court order that shows that there's limits on your movement, for example, or that there's visitation rights of a spouse and things like that. If there's any non-medical disabilities or personal disabilities, then they need affidavits declaring the nature of the non-medical disability and what assistance, workplace assistance, is required. The submission will be reviewed by the relevant province to which the applicant has applied. So again, that even means that if you apply to a different province, one province might say that that is a weaker motivation than another based on what that province has. Then under 24.2, personal considerations, it says a personal consideration affects the applicant's placement but relates to a third party or circumstances outside of the special considerations. Personal considerations tend to be subjective in nature with a significant range of variability. And here I'm not quoting, here I'm explaining this would include the fact that you're married or the fact that you have kids in school. This makes assessing such motivations challenging and time-consuming when made in large numbers. Historically, up to 30% of applicants have used this mechanism to motivate for a specific placement. Keeping the requirements of the Employment Equity Act in mind, the Department of Health must ensure that processes to assess and apply these motivations are fair and rational. Hence, From May 2017, the ICSP Online will be applying a new method to assess personal motivations based on a matrix designed using previous application data. The matrix includes 3 elements, namely the nature of the motivation, the subject of the motivation, and a quantifier. So here again, in their notes, they include a nice table, and there's motivation subjects that include marriage, include family responsibility, religion, and property ownership. And then under their quantifiers, they will include whether there's an issue with your child, an issue with your spouse, an issue with a parent, or with a sibling, or with yourself. So there, for example, if you have family responsibility and that family responsibility is to a spouse, that would be a much stronger motivation than, let's say, it was to a married sibling, because your married sibling has a spouse of their own that can look after them. But your responsibility to your spouse is significantly more important because that's the person that you're married to. I hope that explanation makes sense. The applicant must carefully review Annexure E to identify what is required from them. So fortunately, the website's actually listed, like if you have a child, you just tick that little tick box, and then everything came down as a second drop-down menu because you made that selection. The ICSP Online will guide the applicant through a series of questions around their motivation and will allocate an initial score which will be confirmed during the provincial review. So they actually give you points based on the subjective motivation and then the quantifiers that make it stronger or weaker. Documents with inaccurate or misleading information will result in action against the applicant as described in other sections in this act. So obviously, don't be like that. Don't be that guy. So then all of the special considerations and all of the applicants go through an allocation algorithm. And we're going to speak about allocations and where you can choose, but they've included a very nice figure of the allocation algorithm. And basically it starts out with the total pool of applications. So everyone has applied for an internship post. Now, the first quantifier is whether there are more posts than are equal to the applications. So if I think, for example, of a big hospital like Barra, they might have 150 posts for interns, but only 120 applications. In that case, all 120 people who applied for Barra will get it. So it'll go straight to the provincial review, they'll sign it off, they've got it. Or the second iteration is if there are less posts than the number of applications received. And in this case, they will then look at the special considerations first. And they will look at all of the court orders, all of the medical things, all of the personal applications. And if their posts are still available, then they will just randomize allocation to fill all of those posts. So the number of applications at the end of the day should match the number of posts, but a province or department might actually be able to change the allocations for operational reasons. And they might say, hey, there's 2 interns here, 2 interns there. We can swing things around and then make it work for everyone. I hope you can appreciate this is actually a really intensive process for the department because they don't know any of these people. They have to sift through all of your forms and your applications and try to make it work. Quoting again from the notes, it says the National Departments of Health will analyze the use of the algorithm for each round and then may alter its parameters to improve the number of people allocated or the distribution pattern. All allocations are subject to provincial or department review with changes and signing off. So again, they are making it clear that they might need to adapt or change things. Everything is written out, but it's not set in stone, and that they recognize that there might be situations where even though they've laid out X, Y, Z, that because there are individual factors and there are variables that are beyond their control, they might need to make changes. There's also notes on exchanges or swaps, and I think it's important to encourage you at this point that if you do get a post, to hold on to that post and only after you have a post definitely to make a swap. Because there are a number of people who end up not getting posts and they're waiting because they said no, they didn't want to post for whatever reason, and then they're waiting for second or third rounding and they're not actually getting a post. So the number one thing is don't be unemployed for any number of time. Rather accept a post that you can then swap. Swaps are allowed within a short amount of time as long as it doesn't affect the distribution from province to province where one province is getting an inswell of numbers and another one is losing out on people. As long as everything balances at the end, they don't worry about it too much. So again, based on what you've just heard, if you do stipulate special requirements, you may run the risk of being made to wait for a post, especially with things like social compacts. I actually know of a few friends who, when they applied for internship, actually chose not to social compact, even though they were engaged, because that they believed that their chances of staying in Joburg would be greater if they didn't do a social compact. Some information that I've received as well, which at this stage is just anecdotal, is that once you do social compact, you are limited in what choices of hospitals you have, in that you are directed towards more district or regional hospitals rather than the larger tertiary centers. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it does seem consistent with the model that the Department of Health is going with. And the Departments of Health has not always covered themselves in glory either with the way that the posts are distributed. And I think on our part as junior doctors, we also need to own our side in that sometimes there are instances where interns have been a little bit picky, or they've just refused to accept a post and show up for work because they didn't want it. So obviously no one's forcing you to accept a post, and this is all in keeping with the various conditions of the employment acts that they mentioned in the text. But one thing I have observed is that because of these long bureaucratic processes, which can create problems, I think they have to be so careful to cover themselves legally all along the way that it actually slows things down, and that can become a burden and a drudge. At the same time, on balance, it can be quite encouraging as well, because you know that they're taking into consideration all of everyone's special needs. Okay, so as a newly graduated doctor, let's just come back a bit. You are applying for a job, and as much as possible, all of your individual qualities are taken into consideration, all of your individual concerns. However, we need to recognize the constraints on the system, and if you have too many exceptional circumstances or limits applied, eventually you're going to exclude yourself, and you're going to need to just accept a compromise of some sort or wait until a better opportunity opens up. Many people have spoken about the choices that you need to consider. Do you want to be in an urban environment, or do you want to be rural? Do you want to be in a big hospital or a small hospital? Do you want to be close to home or far away? And everyone's just desperate to know, what's the best hospital to apply for? And we are going to unpack that a little bit, but just on the mechanics of applying for internship, you need to know that the government is trying to prioritize sending doctors into lesser served communities. They do want to prioritize sending interns into rural hospitals, into district hospitals. They do want to prioritize sending interns into these hospitals that need them, because interns are a very important cog in the public health sector machine. We are the worker bees. We do all the ward work, we do all the admin to release those who with a little bit more experience and knowledge to do their specialist skills, right? So there are some incentives for going out of your comfort zone. There are some incentives for saying, even though I have my first preference, I'm going to move. Overall, there are more posts in rural. When you're applying for posts, you can only apply for one metro at a time, with this in mind, for good reason. So you can apply, for example, at Chris Hani Baragwanath in Soweto, Johannesburg, but you can't apply for Barra and Charlotte Maxeke in Parktown, Johannesburg, because they're both in the same metro. You can apply for Grooteskieu, but you can't apply for Grooteskieu and New Somerset or Tygerberg that are also in that same metro. If they're in the same metro, you definitely can't have them. If they're in the same province and they're both metro, you definitely can't have them. So you do need to take things into consideration when it comes to choosing a metro site that you want to be at. When I chose to apply at Charlotte Maxeke, they had 48 posts available on the ICSP website, and I think Barra had more than double that. But there were far, far more people interested in going to Chris Hani Baragwanath than were interested in going to Charlotte. And I think that was unique to our year, because maybe because of the fire in 2021, people didn't know if the post would be available, or if they chose Charlotte, if they would end up doing internship training at another site. But I definitely used that to motivate to choose Charlotte, because I knew that I would definitely get the metro in Johannesburg, and it was a better option for my social circumstances and my special considerations. The important thing is also to think about the popularity of those posts. As I mentioned, you're competing with other people for those same posts, so that might rule out some options for you. Some hospitals like Leratong had 700 applications, but only 24 posts available because it's a second level hospital in Gauteng. So it meant that you could apply for Leratong at the same time as applying for your big metro hospitals in Gauteng. And of course, Leratong is also a nice place to work. It's got a good reputation. It's a good balance between exposure and supervision. So that hospital was very, very competitive, and lots of people were applying for it, even if it was just their second or third choice. It was on many people's lists. Then, in addition to choosing your first choice, you need to consider that you have to apply in at least 3 provinces. Out of the 9 in South Africa, you need to apply in at least 3 provinces. So, I'm a Johannesburger, born and bred through and through. So I applied at Charlotte as my first choice, but then I also applied in the Northwest Province because that includes places like Potchefstroom in the Northwest Province. I also included the Eastern Cape because I have family there and because it's also quite appealing for swaps. So I thought if I don't get my first choice, maybe I can get George Hospital and use that as swaps. In total, I actually chose 5 different provinces, and I had 1 or 2 in each of those provinces, and you do get to rank them. So you can say, this is my first choice, this is my second choice, this is my third choice. But it's important to give consideration to those second and third choices, because if you don't get your first choice, you may well get your second or third choice, and these will obviously be hospitals that you actually want, just in case you don't get your first choice. So I chose hospitals that I knew would give me a similar experience to my first choice, if not being the first choice. So for example, I included Kimberley Hospital, which is far away from Joburg. It's 5.5 hours drive, but I knew that that would be a similar tertiary level experience to what I would get at Charlotte, where I would get good academic teaching, good supervision. And so I included it in my 5, even though I would never dream of going there. I was like, if worst comes to worst, and it's a worst case scenario, at least I can go to something similar. One thing I found out as I researched this topic is that the Department of Health also takes into consideration the number of graduates from your medical school as a contribution to the total number of interns. And this I found fascinating. So to explain this further, let's say your medical school produced 20% of the graduates in a year. So of the medical school graduates in a year. So then they will be given roughly 20% of the posts at each of the big sites. So that means a hospital with 50 posts will be given a maximum of 10 posts to people from that one medical school, because that's 20% of the 50 posts. It seems to me like this is not necessarily a hard and fast rule though, because just judging by the number of interns at my hospital who were with me at Wits must be churning out at least 40% of the pool of doctors each year. This, again, could just be an outlier because of the fire the year before, but in any case, let's take a further look at the government document. And now in this section, we're also going to include what happens if you're not a South African or if you trained abroad and are now coming to do your internship in South Africa. So here, just to reiterate, I'm reading from the notes and I quote exactly. It says, medical internship posts are subject to a simple quota. The quota is based on a ratio of the number of final year medical students from each university in a given year. The quota is applied to the number of posts available within a facility. For example, if there are 50 posts in a facility and a university produces 20% of the graduates in that year, 10 posts will be allocated to its graduates. The National Departments of Health and the Provincial Departments of Health may use their discretion for allocations to smaller facilities. The medical intern applicant must apply to 3 listed posts. One of the posts may not be in a metropolitan area in one of the following provinces: Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, or the Western Cape. Note that if an allocation is confirmed by a province, the individual is automatically placed in that post. There's no need for the applicant to accept the allocation, as they have applied for the post, which in turn has been allocated to them. Applicants who choose to reject their allocation, either in the first or second round, must do so in writing using the ICSP online support email. These applicants will need to wait until the third round before they can apply again. That said, it should be noted that applicants who were not allocated in the second round or who need to be reallocated due to a new special or personal consideration will be prioritized in the third round. Late applications and reapplications based on a rejected allocation will only be placed after the latter group have been accommodated. Now moving to non-South African resident application for medical internship. The Department of Health may offer international students who studied in South Africa internship posts depending on the availability of accredited funded posts, the requirements of the respective immigration legislation and regulations, as well as relevant international agreements. Where the applicant is not a permanent resident of South Africa, the following approach will be taken to process an application. And again, I'm continuing to quote. Number 1, all final year medical students who are non-resident and wish to complete their internship in South Africa must register by May for placements in the annual cycle. Placements will prioritize rural posts in line with Chapter 8 of the Human Resources for Health South Africa strategy. So you note that you're prioritized into rural posts. In keeping with the rights afforded to documented refugees and asylum seekers, they may apply in the first round. Non-resident applicants from SADC countries will be prioritized in line with South Africa's medical education exchange agreements. However, applicants still require release letters signed by their respective ministers of health and may only be allocated after all South Africans have been placed. Non-residents from African countries outside of SADC will be allocated posts after all SADC country applicants have been placed, and non-residents from non-African countries will then be allocated in the remaining posts. Should non-resident applications exceed the available posts, applicants may be waitlisted. The Foreign Workforce Management Unit at the National Department of Health may only provide endorsement letters for permits once an allocation is confirmed by a province. I hope that it makes it clear that there is a hierarchy where South African-born and South African-trained doctors are placed first, followed by the various types of other iterations or variables that people might have, whether you are from the SADC region or not. And again, you can see that SADC countries are prioritized ahead of non-SADC African countries. Okay, so that's the mechanics and the nitty-gritty of the application phase online. Unfortunately, this can be an extremely slow process in enrolling everything out, and they'll tell you that the process will start in July only for it to really get going at the end of August, for example. Or they might send out an update that on this and this date, everything's going to happen. Let's say they might say on the 11th of October, and then the 31st of October will roll around and they still haven't updated you. The South African Medical Association has been very active, and along with JUDASA, the Junior Doctors Association of South Africa, they've been very active in trying to push governments to make these posts available sooner, primarily because, number 1, obviously all junior doctors have to do internship training, but number 2, because it's quite unfair on you as a junior doctor that you might have to uproot your entire life to take on a post with just a few weeks' notice. Some posts are only really released in the middle of December, and you have 2 weeks to uproot yourself, move to a new province, and be ready to start work on the 1st of January. So it can be a little bit unreasonable at times, and there's been a lot of pressure from civil society and from these organization bodies to just get government to do the right thing and get those internship posts out sooner. But I wouldn't hold your breath too much. I wouldn't get too phased in the beginning about getting the posts out as early as you'd like. Just know that if you do get a post, it's fantastic. You've done well. Grab it with both hands, because it doesn't always happen for everyone. As you've heard, there's sometimes a process where people will even be waitlisted because there's just not enough posts to take everyone on. So now moving forward into our next topic related to the application to internship and your internship training, which is the HPCSA accreditation. So first of all, as you start internship, just take a couple of moments to say, well done to me, because I've qualified from arguably the toughest degree program in the world, which is a medicine degree. You know, you're a Bachelor of Medicine, a Bachelor of Surgery, and that's quite a title. It's an extraordinary honor, and you've joined a noble profession. So well done, doctor, on reaching the goal of becoming an intern. And now you need to take the words of a mentor of mine who said that this is not actually the end, that this is just the beginning. It's a license to learn, not a license to practice. And really, internship that's exactly what it is. It's learning and growing and developing the skills and experience you need to be a great doctor one day. So I think it's really wonderful as a young person that you get this opportunity and getting basically what is a guaranteed income for 3 years. That's really, really something special that some of our peers can't count on. Pat yourself on the back, congratulate yourself, celebrate becoming a doctor, and step into internship as your new chapter of learning, knowing that there is actually a good reason for internship. Okay, so coming to the HPCSA accreditation. Obviously, the HPCSA accredits all of the degrees in all of the degree programs at the various medical schools. So they know that you when you qualify, you're already considered to be a safe doctor. You know enough knowledge that if a patient was being treated by you, you'd most likely not do them harm. However, that obviously doesn't mean that you know everything. It doesn't mean that you got 100%, and it also doesn't mean that you know only 60%. It just means that you know enough that they can say you can now serve society. The HPCSA accredits medical schools, but then they also accredits the training of internship sites. And if your hospital falls short in some area, they may say that you need extra training elsewhere. So, for example, at Helen Joseph, not because it has any deficiencies, but rather because it doesn't have those departments to train you, they will say, okay, well, in order for that site to have its accreditation, you need to get extra training elsewhere. And that's why those interns, like I mentioned previously, end up going down the road to Rahima Musa Mother and Child Hospital to get their pediatrics and their obs and gynae training in. And this is where also we need to start to dispel some myths, right? Because I often hear people say things like, but if I don't do internship at Barra, then I'm not going to get the full internship experience. And I think that that's nonsense, because all of the sites have full internship experience. All of them have to meet certain minimum requirements. Basically, they have to be exposing you to enough, and they have to be giving you enough safe oversight that you and the right facilities for you to see the right kind of patients and to see the right kind of conditions for you to come out of it as a qualified doctor. So while a Barra intern might be arriving at 5 o'clock in the morning and leaving at 7 o'clock at night and working these 14-hour days every day and putting up twice the number of drips that the intern at another hospital is doing, that doesn't necessarily mean that their internship experience is any richer or better. Obviously, I have huge love to my Barra baby buddies, so I'm so sorry, guys, for singling you out. I'm just using you as an example because everyone knows that Barra is particularly busy and is also one of the biggest hospitals, if not the biggest. Remember that you will be exposed to things at different levels. So at Barra, while you're treating patients that are mostly referrals, those patients come already with the primary diagnosis. They might even come with some investigations already done. They come with a really solid history and you know what to do. But when you're at a district level hospital, a lot of those patients are undifferentiated and you need to stop and think and use your clinical judgment and say, okay, what could this be? And how would I refer this patient on appropriately? This is something that you can only really get from those lower levels of care that's going to stand you in good stead later on. So I think what I'm trying to say is don't dismiss internship at what we would term a lower level of care like district or a regional hospital, lower certainly than the big hospitals you've heard about. Don't think that you have to do internship at a certain place for it to count, because internship anywhere counts. Every single internship training site is accredited by the HPCSA and it's regularly evaluated. I think it's somewhere in the region of every 2 or 3 years. They come past, they check, they review, and they say, are you getting enough exposure? Are you getting enough teaching and training? So really, whatever internship site you get, grab a hold of it. Enjoy it. Make the most of it. Internship is whatever you want it to be. You can be at the best hospital in the country and have the worst internship experience. And conversely, many people will tell you that they might have started out at a hospital with low expectations of their internship, and they actually ended up being pleasantly surprised at how good the internship experience was. Any single site is valuable, any single site is useful, and you can make a difference right where you are. So that then moves me on to the next point within the HPCSA, and that is the internship logbook. Every single intern for the 2-year period of their internship has a logbook, which you need to first of all, guard and protect, but you need to complete with a certain number of minimum required procedures, as well as having assessments from your leaders in the different departments. So there'll be assessments of your clinical skills, there'll be assessments of your history taking, your professionalism, even things like your punctuality. So it's really developing you as a person and developing you as a doctor, similar to the logbooks that you had as a student, but obviously a lot more advanced. For example, as a medical student, you may have assisted on some cesarean sections, but now as an intern doctor, you're expected to perform a minimum of 10 cesarean sections for yourself. Now again, at the beginning of internship, that seems extremely daunting and nerve-wracking. And you think, how on earth am I going to do this surgery? But you have a whole 3 months of exposure within that department. So in your 3 months of obstetrics, you're expected to be able to perform at least 10 C-sections safely and well with good outcomes for the patient. And obviously on day one of the rotation, there'll be lots of supervision required where your seniors will basically be saying to you, okay, put your suture in there. Yes, now tie your knot like this. No, don't put it in that high. At the end of the block, by the end of that rotation, you should be doing it with a fair amount of skill and your confidence will grow. So there's certain minimum procedures to do and certain assessments. And also very importantly, like I said, guard your logbook. It can ruin you because then you have to go in and find all of those signatures, find all of those assessments again, find all of the records of patients' file numbers along the way. So please, by all means, guard your logbook, protect it, and remember that that is your proof that you've gone through this internship rotation. The accreditation process is there to protect you, the intern, as well as the public. A lot of thought and care must go into it to ensure ongoing good training. And there are certain sites that risk losing their accreditation if they don't make it worthwhile for you as an intern. So really, as a bottom line, don't worry too much about if one site is better than another. All of them are useful and all of them are good for training an intern doctor. So now we will take a look at a suggested algorithm of major points for deciding where you want to do internship. And you can map this out however you want to by giving more weight or more importance to some of the questions and shifting them earlier in the algorithm. You can write it down as a list, or you can choose to draw it as a mind map or a flow diagram, whatever works for you. For me, the first important consideration is to decide whether or not you would like to do internship in an urban environment or a rural environment. Bear in mind that most of the public health facilities in South Africa, and therefore most of our patients, are in what we would call peri-urban or rural settings. Not all, there are loads of hospitals in urban areas. However, it's impossible for everyone to just be in the big metros. Many of our patients will be out in the bundus somewhere, and they also need doctors. They need healthcare, and you, the intern doctor, can provide it for them if that's what you'd like to do. Obviously, there are different pressures in different settings, so you'll need to consider them as part of your decision. In an urban setting, you might have the pressure of traffic in the morning, where it takes you 45 minutes to drive 6 kilometers to the hospital, whereas in the rural area, you'll take 10 minutes or less. Or you might have the pressure of an increased patient load, whereas in rural, you'll have less patients. But on the flip side, you'll also feel the pressure of maybe not having access to the equipment that you want, maybe having to prioritize which patients do get the treatment or do get to use the equipment that you have, that kind of thing. So urban versus rural, do you want to be in the concrete jungle, so to speak, or would you prefer to be near nature? You can also get extra pay if you're in a rural setting where the government will actually incentivize you to take up a rural post by giving you a small stipend or a bit of an extra rural allowance. Our next step, which still relates to that urban or rural, is whether you want to be close to your home, that being your home province, or whether you'd like to move to another province. So some of my colleagues who have lived in the north their entire life have always wanted to move to Cape Town. And so they decided that they wanted to do their internship in Cape Town. And so whether it becomes a permanent move or not, at least they've gotten that exposure to working in that system and in another province. And I guess to have the freedom also of moving away from home. You're still within South Africa. You're still close enough that you can hop on a plane and come back home to visit your family, but you're far away enough that you're now getting some independence. You're getting some liberty. and that's also valuable as well. You're growing up. I mean, by the time you finished medicine, you're at least 23 or 24 years old. It's time for you to spread your wings a bit and stand on your own 2 feet, right? So that's the next consideration, whether you want to be close to home or whether you want to travel to another province. Another thing is, where are you going to stay? Are you going to stay in your own place, like a flat or a house? Or are you going to stay with a friend? Are you going to stay with an important life partner? Or are you going to stay in the doctor's quarters, the DQ at the hospital? Many larger hospitals have doctor's quarters available, but not all. Staying in DQ does have some advantages. Using our hospital, for example, at Charlotte Maxeke, the DQ is basically single bedroom bachelor flats, and they don't have many amenities, but they only cost a little over 1,000 Rand a month, which is a great benefit. If you're working at the hospital, you're basically living on site, and your rent is so cheap. And a lot of that money that you save, you can then put into savings and investments, or paying off student loans, or buying yourself furniture or a car. So there's many things to consider, many things to think about in this regard. So where do you want to stay? You're an adult now. You're not staying in res, so you get to make decisions about what you want your life to be like. The next consideration is what kind of hospital you want to be at. Would you like to be at a big tertiary level or even quaternary level hospital in a big metro with academic programs and lots of lecturers and mentors and even sometimes students working with you? Or would you prefer to be at what we would say a lower level of care, like a district hospital or a regional hospital, where you might not get as many good mentors, but you'll get a lot more responsibility and learn by doing? You might get a little bit more ownership or responsibility over patients. For me, I wanted to be close to home. Obviously, with a wife and 3 children, I had 4 other people's lives to think about. I often say that if I was 24 years old and basically only responsible for me, I would have liked to have chosen Barrow for internship. But I'm not disappointed with the hospital I'm employed at. I like my hospital. It's fairly functional. I like learning, and I also like having some of the advanced treatments and technologies there. And I know and I like some of the staff that work there because I was a student at the University of the Witwatersrand. So I'm familiar with some of the faculty at Charlotte Maxeke Johannesburg Academic Hospital. There's also very, very high quality oversight and academic training. And I didn't really feel that as a medical student, I had finished the curriculum, so to speak. I think there's just so much to study that sometimes you're studying to pass a test, but not necessarily to have that knowledge and to hold that knowledge well. So for me, I think that the benefits of having that mindset of still being a student of medicine and surgery allows me to not get too worried about when I'm being a paper pusher at the hospital, because I know I can continue to learn, continue to grow, continue to be exposed to the stuff that the students are learning, because I need to remind myself some of the things that were in the curriculum that I didn't get right, that I didn't get the first time. And another thing that you need to think about when you think about where to stay and what kind of hospital to go to is to consider what kind of transport you might need. For many people, the hospital will be where you go to and from up to 28 days or even more in a month. So you need to consider what kind of transport or access to transport you're going to have. Are you going to be able to commute for 45 minutes to get to work? Or do you need to have a hospital that's really close to where you stay? Or even one where you can use public transport like taxis? Or do you choose that you're going to have your own car? Is that something that you're going to buy as an intern? Because many banks and financial institutions, funny enough, as soon as you qualify, they're very, very quick to offer you vehicle finance and to give you a credit facility. At this point, I want to refer you to episode 29 of the Dr. Coffee podcast, which is available as a full HD video episode on YouTube, as well as on all our audio platforms, in which I sat down with 2 experts, one representing the used car market and the other representing new car sales. And I discussed the options that junior doctors have when deciding to buy a car. And then there are a few other minor considerations that are probably more important for some than others. But these include things like who else is going to be at that hospital? Who's going to choose that hospital as well? Are you going to a location that only speaks a given language that you don't know? And what's the demographics of the people and the community that you're going to be serving? And then that helps you to anticipate what sorts of environmental and social determinants of health may be at play in that community you're going to be caring for. So let's recap. When it comes to your considerations, to think about whether you want to be in urban or rural, do you want to be close to home or do you want to be in another province? Do you want to live at doctor's quarters or do you want to live in your own place in the city? Do you want to live in a little homestead? Do you want to live with someone? Do you want to live on your own? And then, do you want to be in an academic setting? Do you want to be part of research? Do you want to be part of grand rounds with learned professors? Or would you prefer to be at a district level of care where you've got more of the undifferentiated patients and you're challenged a bit more, but maybe you have less supervision or a different type of mentor? Then what kind of transport or access do you require? Do you need public transport? Do you have your own car? And how are you going to get around? What are the people you're going to be serving going to be like? Finally, in conclusion, let's bring this all to a head and just remind ourselves what the purpose of internship is. The purpose of internship is to learn and grow. No one expects you to be able to do everything. It's an opportunity to be exposed to all of the different parts of medicine at a level far deeper than when you're a student. I think back to when I was a student and I did only 2 weeks of anesthetics training. And while it was great to be in theater and it was great to pre-med with the anesthetist and it was awesome to get to intubate a few patients and to get those clinical skills in, it really was only a very small slice and a small window into what anesthesia is really all about. Internship is an incredible opportunity, and if you come at it with the right attitude, internship will be great. Of course, internship is difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and pretend like it's easy, but it's also not the drudgery that some people can make it out to be. Internship really is about getting out whatever you put in. So if you want it to be a great time, you'll work hard, you'll look for opportunities, and you'll make a success of it. Well, there we have it. Hopefully you've gotten some insights, some encouragement, some information, and maybe even bust a few myths. There's wisdom in many advisors. Seek the advice and perspectives of people ahead of you who did their internship at different places, and speak to people who are doing internship now. On this note, I'd like to direct you to some great resources for further reading and research. The website sadocs.co.za have put together a brilliant resource for internship with site reviews of many hospitals. They also include reviews of the accommodation and the rotations at the hospital, so you can look at whether the hospital matches with your particular interests. Again, that's the website sadocs.co.za. They've done an amazing job, and I invite you to check out their internship questionnaire and complete it yourself if you've already completed internship. For all current and past interns, I've also compiled a brief questionnaire of my own to survey your internship experience. I'm hoping to get enough responses to this to include information from the survey in some future episodes of the podcast. So I invite you to check out the link to the Google form in the link tree for this podcast, once again linked to in the show notes for this episode. There you can also find that I've linked to the ICSP applicant guide, which was published by the National Departments of Health and is available online as well as in the show notes for this episode, or by clicking on the link in the link tree in our Instagram bio. Now, this document basically covers everything we discussed today in a summary form, as well as step-by-step graphics of where you're going to click and the sequence of steps to take when navigating the ICSP website. Keep in mind, this document is at least a couple of years old now, so it's not guaranteed to match exactly what you see on the ICSP platform at the time that you are applying, but I've scrolled through it and it seems like it matches my experience when I applied just 2 short years ago. So be sure to check out the show notes for these and other great resources. For those of you who are going to be completing the application process towards the end of the year, I wish you the best of luck and may the odds be ever in your favor. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dr. Coffee Podcast. If you felt motivated, encouraged, inspired, or even challenged, please consider sharing with a junior doctor or a medical student in your world who you think needs to hear this. Have a great day.